It's an incredible honor to introduce the next speaker, Watu Wamae. It's a colleague at AfOx. She is the research engagement manager at AfOx, but also leads our innovation work. I could, the way Kevin said that if you write the whole list of accolades of Carlos, you might be here the whole day. If I start listing all the research engagement work that Watu has done, I might lose my job. Watu's research is primarily focused on the networks of innovation. She's worked on mechanism of connecting research to industry, which is what the Health Innovation Platform is about. And she will talk to us about new perspectives and orientations and how science and technology can help us shape the future that we desire. We've looked at the back. Let's look at the forwards now. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Watu Wamae.
Thank you very much. How does this down here? Right. Ooh. Okay, that's me. All right. So I'll be talking to you about technological capabilities in Africa. As Anne mentioned this morning, we had a lot of discussion around all the very many challenges and maybe different frameworks and perspectives of thinking of how we can actually engage with that. And I'm going to carry on that vein. So one thing in terms of a small background, but I'm not going to belabor the point because it's been brought up a number of times here and we are all very aware about it. We know about the growing population in Africa and what that might look in not too the distant future. And then we also know about the young aspirational demographic and thinking about ways of how we can channel the great energy and talent into making the difference that we're talking about. And we also know there's accelerating urbanization. And Judy in the morning was talking about building roads for cars, and you can't cross a street in Nairobi because it hasn't been thought through. So a lot of that has already been mentioned. So I'll just carry on and talk about something exciting that is going on. And you may well be familiar with the very energetic fintech, e-commerce, e-logistics news that is coming out of Africa and how fast it's growing. We all know the story of mobile money and M-Pesa in Kenya and how it opened up spaces and helped the unbanked. And on the back of that, a lot of good stuff is coming in terms of fintech. And this diagram here shows that actually in 2020, 2021, Africa was the fastest growing continent in this area. The landscape was expanding very rapidly. We have the very beautiful hockey stick that everybody looks for when they're talking about startups. And I'm sure you've heard lots about the great work that Nigeria is doing and the other countries that are frequently mentioned in terms of fintech. And that's brilliant, and more needs to be done. There's scope to do much more. But I don't want to dampen your hopes, but to mention that at the end of the day, Africa's challenges go beyond software. They'll not be solved by software alone, because when we talk about all these things, which are very important, payment, even to do with insurance, identity, being able to buy stuff online on your phone and so on and so forth, and make payments on mobile platforms, etc., and blockchain thrown in there, fabulous. But beyond that, we have to think about the real economy. These kind of things facilitate the selling goods and services, trading products and so on, but where do the products come from? And what are we doing about that? And if you're not doing as much as we ought to, what exactly is the problem, if there's one? So when we think about the real economy, we are talking about elements that were discussed this morning, such as energy. We had a presentation on renewable energy. There was also the question of health. In fact, I remember Judy saying that what we need in Africa is health. What we need in Africa is food, exactly the things that we need to have flourishing economies. And all these areas here also require a huge amount of innovation. If we were to see the same spectacular growth in these areas as we are seeing in fintech, and if it was following through, there would be much more to be optimistic about. But we are yet to sort of open up that space. So I'll talk a little bit about why that might not be happening. But I'll begin with giving an example using health, not because we can't use energy as an example or something else, or food security, etc. But we all know about, again, the epidemiological transformation that we are seeing. So, we know everything about that. Judy mentioned it. We'll probably hear more about it this afternoon. And in fact, she was talking about the curriculum in medical school still being very much tied to infectious diseases, important as they are. We now have non-communicable diseases that are needing much more attention. And there's also the question of strengthening health systems. So we know in Africa there's still quite a lot of work to make healthcare accessible to the wider population, and a lot of innovation could be taking place there. And then also in areas to do with genomics and other new techniques that have come up for dealing with diseases and so on. So a lot of work yet to happen in this area, and it would be fantastic if the same amount of energy was seen as we are seeing in fintech. It's not to say that nothing is happening, but much more could be done. So this is what Judy was alluding to in the morning when she was saying that we are seeing a lot more non-communicable diseases. You probably know this diagram, this map anyway, that says that we have this higher probability of dying in Africa from non-communicable diseases than the rest of the other continents, be it because of the health systems that are not strong enough to support that, and various other things that need to be put in place. So that's enough for the example. One might be asking then, we know all that. What are you telling us that is new? What has this? Where do we go from here? And I spent quite a bit of time looking at the question of how to connect the research that happens within universities with industry. The point being to create new products and services that then solve the problems that we're talking about. Because obviously, doing a huge amount of research, is one thing, and publishing papers and so on, but you probably also want to see impact on the ground that is coming out of that research. So the idea here is to see how that could be connected to industry to then achieve the societal transformation that we very much need. And Carlos was talking about the mega trends, and those need to be dealt with, demographics, health, and so on and so forth. Now, to do that, I'm going to focus on the specific relationships that exist between universities and industry. And it was also mentioned in the morning that beyond processes and techniques and mechanisms and so on and so forth, information is gold. So being able to generate information that will help you develop the knowledge that you need to solve problems is a key element. And I'm going to look at that from the perspective of how universities and industry could engage better in the African context to be able to achieve that. And that will allow us to really get a sense of what is actually going on within the African continent as we stand. And the point in doing that is to broaden perspectives, to begin to think about how we could really push forward innovation for sustainable development. And my argument is going to rest very much on applied sciences and interdisciplinary networks, not because humanities and other things don't matter. I'll refer to that and explain how that comes in. But it's just so as I remain focused on the key point I want to bring across. Now, in most places across the world, we have a spectrum that carries all the way from basic science to marketing to the end user and so on and so forth. And we know that within the African context, there's a lot of effort that has gone into doing research, attempting to do all sorts of exciting things around applied research. At the same time, we also know when we look at industry, that industry is very much focused on production. And by production, what I mean there is that it's very much about packaging or form and filling and so on and so forth. That is important, but it's not all that is needed. And then, of course, there is marketing. So you'll hear countries saying, oh, we have a lot of industries and manufacturing industries, and we're doing a lot about industrialization. But when you look very closely, you find that actually it's mostly packaging and that sort of activity. Whereas what is really needed to make a difference is missing. So that's the missing bubble over there. And it's what allows the connection between research and converting of that research into usable products that then make a difference. And from the African perspective, if a lot of work was going into that space, then we would have our own dance, would understand our own dance. We wouldn't be waiting for somebody to, tell us what our own dance is. So we wouldn't be having, a missing bubble in there. And, for various reasons, the emphasis has been, there are many other pressing issues, sending children to school, you don't really need to focus on, coming up with new products and so on. And of course, we now know that that is unhelpful. It's misguided, and it doesn't really take us far beyond where we want to go. It doesn't take us into sustainable development. And that particular bubble, I refer to it as design, engineering, and associated management capabilities. And the point here is to emphasize about the capabilities required in this space. So it's not just general, capabilities. We're talking about those capabilities that are actually akin to those that exist within universities. We might have heard a lot about the Oxford vaccine and the interrelationships between what Sarah Gilbert was doing and what AstraZeneca, how AstraZeneca was engaging with the university to be able to take that forward. Because obviously Sarah and her team were able to come up with a vaccine in their manufacturing unit and so on. But if you want to produce large batches, you need to go into industry. But to actually do that effectively, to make sure that the vaccines that are produced in the manufacturing unit have exactly the same properties when they're produced in batch, it means that at AstraZeneca, they have a team of scientists and researchers who actually understand the science. They could, well be working within universities, and they're able to convert that to produce bigger batches with exact properties. And that is actually the goal here. So, we're talking about information. So the interactions that are happening are interactions that allow exchanging of information to build on the knowledge that is coming out and convert it into products. And so my argument is that we need that to be happening. It's not enough to say, there's fintech and so on and so forth. Yeah, fintech, but fintech is not really going to fix everything that we need fixed. So, for example, if I were to break my leg, obviously it's very unlikely that an app is going to take the pain away or fix the leg. And similarly, if there was villagers somewhere in a village that has been drought-stricken because of prolonged extreme weather effects and so on, and are threatened by hunger, we can't ask them to eat algorithms. What they need is food, and it has to be produced. And this is the reason why we really have to think beyond what we've been doing so far. Now, I'll just pause one moment here because I know I've gone on about applied sciences and spoken about design and engineering and made it sound as though it's all about natural sciences, as though social sciences and humanities have nothing to say about this, and that is obviously not true. If we break down what we mean by design, immediately, we realize that there's the design that engineers, and other people in natural sciences might be engaging with, but we are also thinking about philosophy, for example, the hard questions that Caesar, for example, keeps asking, when you're, thinking about how to come up with frameworks or how to design or why you're thinking the way you're thinking and so on. We need that. It's critical. And more so now that, we have AI and, ethics have to be defined and so on and so forth so that we don't have the obstacles that, follow on from uncontrolled AI. And then, there's much more now that is being done around, design thinking, user experience, and so on relies quite a lot on things like linguistics, again, humanities here, so that, people are really able to engage with, all these new products that are being produced and so on. And of course, there's the systems thinking, and Peter here might say much more about that and the importance of understanding the bigger picture and incorporating it, so incorporating that into the products you're making, because it's very much about understanding the context and coming up with solutions that will actually improve the situation, not make it worse. So, and engineering, I don't need to say much more about that because that is generally understood. It was really just to emphasize we're not excluding humanities or social sciences. They have a big say in the conversation here. Now, so in terms of the multidisciplinary. We know that in universities there's all these areas. Music could be very helpful, maybe in helping people who are suffering from, all sorts of maybe mental health or something else and so on. In fact, I was watching a documentary where apparently music has a positive effect on people who are having, surgery, or, it helps them, get through it and so on. So there are all sorts of things that, that are needed and have to be, engaged with. It's not a matter of saying in African universities, we all need now to focus on STEM subjects, important as they are. It's important not to forget that the others have contributions and to really try and engage with them and to see how they can contribute to sustainable futures. But the conversation really here is what happens between what is going on within universities in Africa and industry. So I've already spoken about the nature of industries in African countries. So we have a sense that industries themselves, need to be able to do much more. And of course, that relies on capabilities being produced and being integrated in industries. And it's not so much necessarily the incumbent industries. Now we have a different, route where we have startups coming up and then becoming very large companies and so on. So it doesn't have to be incumbents that are doing all the work. So we have pathways that are very exciting. The work we do at AfOx with innovation is really very much about startups and trying to create a new way of doing things and building up on the industry work that is needed to take things forward. So I think this is my last slide. So I'm going to stop here and let Peter take the floor.